Good afternoon, everyone. Thank you so much for joining us today for Black Writers Read. My name is Nicole M. Young Martin, and I serve as a producer and host for this series. And I'm coming to you from my home office in Northern Connecticut, where it is hotter than thou outside, though it's only just the tail end of May. But it's New England, where the weather shifts from sun to snow in just a handful of hours. Black Writers Read showcases, celebrates, and honors the words, work, and traditions of Black writers from across the country, across genres, across experiences, and across the African diaspora. Black Writers Read is a behind the scenes conversation into the craft and what it means to create as a Black author in today's society. Since starting the series during the summer of 2020, we've hosted over 30 authors representing various genres, including children's books, young adult fiction, poetry, urban creative nonfiction, memoir, history, horror, essays, food, and culture from around the globe, including Western Massachusetts, Los Angeles, Washington, D.C., upstate New York, Vermont, Cambridge, Massachusetts, and Portugal. We recently wrapped up an Indiegogo campaign where we raised over $3,600. Funds raised through this campaign will be used to launch our website, obtain the trademark on the name, logo, and tagline, pay guest honoraria for 2 seasons, and pay platform hosting fees for the live stream episodes and the audio podcast, which will launch later this summer. I will remain forever grateful to the 58 individual supporters that contributed to this campaign. You can visit me on social media at Coco Pen Explorer to see the list of the friends and fans who supported this endeavor. I'm so excited to get today's conversation started. Today, we welcome poet Saida Agostini. Saida Agostini is a queer Afro-Guyanese poet whose work explores the ways Black folks harness mythology to enter the fantastic. Her work is featured in Plum, Hobart Pulp, Barrel House, Auburn Avenue, amongst others. Saida's work can be found in several anthologies, including Not Without Laughter, Poems of Humor, Sexuality, and Joy, The Future of Black, and Plum Poetry 9. She is the author of Stunt, which was published by Neon Hemlock in October of 2020. It is a chapbook reimagining the life of Nellie Jackson, a Black madam and FBI spy from Natchez, Mississippi. Her full-length feature collection, Let the Dead In, published by Allen Squire Publishing, was released in spring of 2022. Today, Saida will be reading excerpts from Let the Dead In. A Cave Canem graduate fellow and a member of the Black Ladies Brunch Collective, Saida is a 2-time Pushcart Prize nominee and Best of the Net finalist. Her work has received support from the Ruby Arts Grants and the Blue Mountain Center, amongst others. She lives online at www.saidaagostini.com. Today's episode is being presented in collaboration with Levee Break Lit. Thank you so much to Lisa Pegram and her company for introducing us to Saida. For those who are new to Black Writers Read, here's the format of our show. First, Saida will share an excerpt of her work. Afterwards, we'll engage in a conversation, and then we'll open it up to Q&A for all of our viewers. We have viewers joining us from both Facebook and YouTube today. If you have a question, please feel free to include it in the comment section on the platform where you're joining us from today. I will monitor and compile the questions and pose them to Saida following our conversation. Now, I'd love to bring Saida onto the virtual stage. Hello.
Hi, how are you doing?
I'm so great. How are you?
I'm good. I'm inside, which is all we can ask on 90-degree weather.
Yeah, because I was wondering if it was 90 degrees where you were too.
It sure is, yes. This glow is not just foundation.
Yeah. So I will turn it over to you and have fun.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm really, really honored to be here with y'all today. I'll be reading, as Nicole shared, from my first full length collection, Let the Dead In, which is published by Allen Squire Publishing. And I'm going to start with a poem that means a lot to me. It's called I Write of My Mother in the Book of Joy. Most evenings find mummy pacing down cooling paths in a blaze of blossoms. Nothing that lived in Guyana can be nursed here. So instead, her resistance is found in the bud of hydrangeas, gladiolas, and a love of hummingbirds. The most common of flowers will be tended. During the summer, she glories in the rightness of blooming, dedicating hours to pulling errant weeds that choke the root. Even in winter, she is pledged to nursing life in the bitterest of Maryland snow. Think on the 4 lime trees sheltering in our house by the dining table, forcing my blustering father to cower at least for a short while in its branches. Neighbors come by to exclaim at the impossible orchard reared among wood-planked walls. My mummy, the stubborn farmer, laughing proudly by its fruit, requests for advice returned with exacting directions on wind, sun, and timing. Yet when my sister and I hear her, what we think of are 2 little girls reared less gently than this. Her, a young, lonely mother with sometimes brutal hands. But here I am, crying at the lesson of her bowed back in the garden, hands dug into a mire of dirt, stubbornly willing love into life. So one of the things that happened, I come from a pretty traditional Guyanese family, and my mom was like, "Why are you writing all these poems with all of this information?" Right? As most Black folks do. So I think I wrote this poem somewhat in response to her. It's called Notes on Archiving Erasure, and there's an epigraph from James Baldwin, who I like to pretend is my best friend. The epigraph is Love does not begin and end the way we think it does. Love is a battle, love is a war, love is a growing up. When I say I love my family, what I mean is I worship the battle. You can't wish away creation or reorder blood. Childishly, I thought we could retell stories. I mean to say, I can't lie. In truth, there are wretched days I call my sister and ask, was this real? Did this happen? She says nothing. Part of love can be called refusing to answer. My mother says, let things lie. She means murder it. Let our shame be a suffocating vine. We were made to believe that everything we bore was ugly, a family of shell-shocked gods fleeing their own clay. Yet, I will come back to the door of our own home, sit at its steps, and fall in love with the slow order of our creation. The seasons it took to urge kindness into our natures, how we won glory even as the city fell. And I'm actually going to share a poem that I haven't read in a long time. So this poem was actually something that was written for a anthology I was part of, and the Black Ladies French Collective, which is a writing collective I was part of, all had to write a series of poems. And I wrote this literally from under the bed right after Trump got elected, and everyone kept saying, "No, no, Trump won't get elected," and he did. And I had to write a poem. So I wrote this. It's called "Steps to Safety." 1. Listen to Luther nonstop. 2. Wear low-cut shirts. 3. Quit your job by staging a praise dance version of Beyonce's Freedom in front of your racist ass boss. Get the cashier at 7-Eleven to do Kendrick Lamar's verse. 4. Call your granny. Cry. 5. Cry again with your daddy. 6. End the call when he asks about your 401k. 7. Think about the positives of the Trump administration, namely Pence's hair. How does a white man get his hair so on fleek? Does he use Does he use blue magic? Does he have a black barber? Is his name Lamont? Is Lamont a Republican? Did Lamont give Pence a do-rag? Does Pence wear said do-rag during Black History Month? 8. Call your granny again. Discuss Pence's hairs. Compare it with Bernie's at the DNC. Listen to her hushed whispers in the bathroom when she shares that Bernie could get it. 9. Weep again in your white therapist's office. Listen as your white therapist says, I don't really think Trump will round up all Black queer people. 11. Wonder how she quantifies all. Would all include everybody except Lamont, Pence's lover? Who are the exclusions? 12. Realize you are weary of white disbelief. 13. Look at her face while you are crying. See her eyes water. They are probably allergies. She tells you she is probably safe. 14. Read of the 8 trans people who have committed suicide since the elections. 15. Think of Pence again and all the Black queer and blood on his hands. Trump's silly wig and the millions of dollars he has invested in the pipeline. 16. Read Macbeth. Imagine Trump in tights and a cockpiece. Sage your eyes. 17. Research visas to Guyana. Think about whether or not the closet could look good on you. Realize the only gay woman you know of in Guyana is a lady boxer. Research on Facebook for said lady boxer for 45 minutes until you realize that lady boxer is probably not her name. Her name is most likely Eunice or Marjorie. 18. Text back and forth with Blair about countries to move to. Think about how Blackness is a gamble wherever you go. 19. When you think of home, you think of Granny, a 90-year-old woman, a living altar rooted here. 20. Ask your heart if it can flee. 21. Listen to the answer. This poem is actually inspired by a lot of the Yo Mama jokes that I remember hearing. I think as many of us do. Like, your mama's so fat, your mama's so this, So those actually hurt me a lot when I was little. And so I wrote this one. This is called Two Fat Black Women Are Making Love. And the joke is right there. Ready, shuddering, and alive, rife with promise. There are so many pasts that have been worn out for a quick, easy laugh. Tyler Perry strutting with a gun and wig, screaming rotund and loud like a Medea would, Martin calling out "Yo Mama" on television, or the meme of a young woman shot underhand, her belly in love with a tight skirt, hands moving towards an open mouth. Look at everything she devours. Imagine it. Does it make you hungry too? Two fat Black women are making love on a bed on the floor, and they are weeping for joy. They are crying, great folds of flesh flushing and shaking. One cannot look in the mirror save for thinking of her daddy. All this ugly and skinned together counts the men who say they hate her body as they do bitter cops and dead Black boys. Two fat Black women are making love, and they touch each other like they can hold it. Honeyed, profane body, like patriots, like their bodies have never been folded into freezers, screamed at on streets, coaxed or threatened, sweet, like they have names, like we will know them. So this poem was actually inspired by a former partner who asked me to write a love poem, which I think is an important lesson for everybody who has a poet as a partner. Maybe don't ask them to write you a love poem until it's time, but this is what I got. This is called Adventures of the Third Limb. I want to name our cock Chocolate Thunder. Tammy thinks I've lost my mind. I see her cock as a blaxploitation heroine, resplendent in the finest of neon spandex, draped in golden chains and a velvet cape, stiff in resolution to kick any jive turkey punk motherfucker ass into submission. Our cock has framed pictures of Prince on the wall and listens to Dion Estes to show her sensitive side. She is fluent in 7 languages, drinks Dos Equis, can paint, sing gospel, praise dance, and is head usher at the Church of Dynamic Discipleship. Our cock is the Renaissance stick. And if you are looking at her sideways, bitch, what has your cock done for you lately? Our cock doesn't hide when company comes, stalks out butt naked in sequin pumps, shining with lube, sits spread-eagled on the dinner table and says embarrassing shit about the things she would do to Kerry Washington. And when everyone else leaves and only the 3 of us are left, all limbs and laughter, she pulls me and Tammy closer, our pussies climbing up her veins girth. This is how we fit together. Loud, tight, and eager, our wails, their composition, agitated, aching notes, excessio and broken chord. In the studio later, with Smokey outfitted in a double-breasted Stacey Adams suit, matching gaiters, pinky ring, and straw Panama hat, she'll share a blunt and then play cruisin' while talking shit about how hard we came and the scent of wet. But in that moment, oh, my love. So I think we have time for about two more poems. This is actually the poem that inspired the title, Granny Speaks to the Dead. My family is from Guyana in South America, and my mother's mother, my maternal grandmother, is from a small river village that is right by the Pamun River, which is called Coca-Cola Water. And I'm just thinking of her right now because last month is the first anniversary of her death. And we actually buried her in Kabakabiri. The wind is sulk and salt, shaking bamboo arched into a green prayer for our path. Granny leads the way, Mummy beside her, walking to the cluster of nameless concrete graves that compose the only family history we know. Everything before 1913 is a fruitless game of imagination made for nights at home after rum and black cake. Granny and her sisters arguing over who died first and how. Aunt Rosamond, baker of the sweetest cakes in adventure, lost to her own love of sugar, or Uncle Clive, a dainty black man with sooty skin softer than the river he walked into, beguiled by the call of mermaids or drink. Even Granny's history is a twist of ready evasion. A young girl, eldest of 13, who lived hungry, breathless, and beautiful until my grandfather found her on the waters of Demerara, took her home, and said, "You are mine." Now, 50 years later, Granny is back home beside me, on hands and knees, cleaning a baby's grave, talking to her of death, saying, "My sweet girl, I'm here. Keep me company in my dreams, no?" I've learned from her how to make your own story. Just let the dead in. So this will be the last poem I read, and this is called "The Mermaid Speaks." A big part of my book is exploring Guyanese mythology, and the mermaid figures a lot in my family history. I actually do have, I think, at least two family members who I have not met who said they were kidnapped by mermaids, and so I felt like clearly the answer was to write about it. The Mermaid Speaks. Everything they have said is true. I have eaten men as you would a tangerine, thoughtlessly, reverently, juice smeared about my mouth. Perhaps you would blame me, call me bloodthirsty along with the rest of my kin, the Kanaima, the whole hike, even the Mazaruni, roused up a gang of the young stupid on palm wine to come and stake me. And I laugh as surely as you weep on my shores. This ownership, you'll forgive me, I took it as the Dutch did your children. Your forebears came on the same hunt after I ate another man. Your granddaddy? Forgive me. He was lovely. Ripe copper skin, warmed with the sun, singing among the white lotus as if he could charm the roots of trees into fealty. I remember weeping with my sisters and below in our city. Maybe he wept too. It's been so long, I can't be sure, and there is nothing I want to pretend with you. So I did what was impossible. Swam up, struggling past the pleas of my own mother, burst through the pomeroon and beseeched him into my arms. Yes, I say begged without shame. You know the men of your blood, what they can drive you to do. And forward he came, fearful of drowning, dancing into my naked red arms. And when I ate him, he urged me on, saying with delight as my teeth met the cradle of his flesh. I have heard his wife crying at our shores, hands tethered to her children, dragging them to and fro as if her love could raise him. The fishermen say she went mad with grieving. Is this true? Thank you.
Oh, that was so amazing. I'm up here. I was like crying in the background. I was like off camera, like, oh my God. I love your work so much.
Thank you.
I have to read. There is one line from one poem that I have to share with everyone that I just love. And I'm like, just the power and the imagery here. And this, I think, sums up your work so well. This is from Harriet Tubman as a Lesbian, which is on page 64 of Let the Dead In. I want a history where Harriet and Sojourner get together and make that cataclysmic, head banging, good God kind of love while Luther serenades them. With skin so shiny, it looks like he just swam all up in Johnson and Johnson's. I want him there singing to them. His sequin blazer, the North Star, they follow hand in hand under the cover of knotted trees and vines that rise up to hide them. Like, yo, this was like just everything that this piece evokes. I was just like, so just thank you. That's like, just thank you for your words. Like,
Thank you.
yes. So, speaking of words, let's get our conversation started. So, the first question I have for you is poetry is your genre. How did it find you? And when did you know this was the form in which your literary voice needed to take?
That's a really good question. I think a couple of things happened. I'm a survivor of child sexual abuse. And,
Mm,
I think oftentimes, like when your consent to your own body is taken away at a very early age, um, the arts becomes a really powerful way of reclaiming that, right? Like, I don't think if you asked me at like 8 years old, hey, little Saida, why are you writing? I wouldn't be like, to reclaim my agency, right? But there is something that I think felt really powerful for me as like a little Black girl about like, if I felt sad, I can go and write about it. And there's no one who could deny what I wrote, right? Like, well, I mean, even if they did, like, I'm like, I wrote it. What you gonna do, right? And then I think there's also like this like sense of affirmation, right? Like,
mm,
so my grandmother actually was the one who taught me how to read. And I showed her, my first poem. It was like something about like friends and flowers, still very evergreen. I mean, I feel really confident it could win a push cart now. It was clearly the sign of a genius. And Granny was like, you are a genius, right?
oh,
And so it's like, well, if Granny says it, it has to be true. She's like one of those elder Black women, the ones like they could be talking about
yep.
anything. And you're like, oh, well, you're right. She could literally have been like, you can only eat beets. And I'd be like, well, of course. That's what we all need to be doing, eating beets. That's how Oprah decided Barack Obama would be president. Oprah told us, an older Black woman, that's what we do. Right. But all kidding aside, I mean, I think like I've tried other mediums over the years. I
Mm,
can't draw worth a damn, all of those things, but it keeps coming to me in the moments when I feel the most happy, the most joyful, and the most sad. Like I
mm.
know a lot of us, like I was all today. I was like, why am I so sad? And I'm like, oh yeah, like 10 folks just got murdered in Buffalo. And it doesn't really feel like it matters. And I'm like, I'm
Mhm.
carrying it in my body, but
Right.
poetry seems to be the way to document it and to make sure that I'm not disconnected from my own body and my own heart.
Mm, nice. So titles have specific meanings. They are a specific invitation to how to engage and receive the work. The title Let the Dead In hits me in a very specific way, especially given the times that we are currently living in. Can you talk about why this title specifically, and also why is the title in all lowercase letters?
Well, I think that I just tend to feel with me and grammar have a very interesting relationship. I should just say that on the onset, right? Like it's a love-hate thing, it's going to be complicated for the rest of our lives. Like it's messy, right?
Yes.
But what I will say is that when I think of where we are in this moment, it's hard for me to think in terms of like a full sentence, right? Like the capitalization and then a period, because we continue to be in a moment of in between. Like history keeps on moving, right? And so I think the lack of capitalization, why that feels so necessary to me is because we are in the midst of an ongoing conversation. I'm not ending
Mm.
anything. I'm continuing it, right? And so I think my use of grammar and my refusal to use capitalization speaks to
Yes.
that. And then I think with "Let the Dead In," yeah, so everything I described, I actually read that poem because we had talked about it, right? Like my granny speaks to the dead, um, is because my maternal grandmother, I think, was so deeply connected to the dead. She always talked about seeing
Mm.
ghosts and like having people come down, like jumbies, and come down and speak with her. And she did. She talked to the dead all the time. And even now, like I think, like when I think about the people that I miss the most in my life, my great aunt Marjorie, my granny, granddaddy,
Mm.
um, I talk to them. I know my mom does too. And I think we have to let those folks in because I think they give us the
Mm.
lessons to figure out how we want to move forward and how we want to be.
Yeah, and also what I love too when you mention the whole like particular nature of the lowercase letters, not one word privileges the other. So dead is not capitalized, in is not capitalized. So there's just this unique marriage of the present and the past and honoring, the future. I love that so much.
That's real deep, and I'm going to start saying that from now on. I'll credit
Yes!
you. I'll credit you, but I'm saying that.
Lisa, take note for a campaign. So this is something that I thought was really interesting, especially given that Stunt was published in October of 2020. And then
Hmm.
this book came out earlier this year. And like the world imploded, like legit, like in the midst of the two books being created. And I'm like, I'm so curious. And I'll get to the initial question in terms of like what existed before the fucking world blew the fuck up. Like before Breonna Taylor, before George Floyd, before COVID, I'm like, I bet you were working on these poems before that.
Hmm.
So my question is, how did the poems of this particular collection come together, and how have they evolved since the resurgence of the Black Lives Matter movement?
Yeah. I mean, I think that's an interesting question, right? Because I, I'm in a place now where, and I almost hesitate to say this because it sounds so grandiose, but I think it's true. We have always been living in apocalypse. And when I talk about
Mm.
always, like, I guess I want to be a bit more precise and say, at least since, we were taken by force from our
Right.
homes, by European people, and, enslaved. We've been living in an apocalypse, right? And
Mhm.
it's been hard because has been parts of me that like, yo, like life has been really hard in like the last few years. And yet, right, like when we think about the story of Reese Taylor, who,
Yeah.
and her being gang raped in the 1940s and um having really no real recourse, right? For justice and still fighting for it. Or we think
Mhm.
about Brescia Meadows, who,
Right.
killed her father in self defense in Ohio. That all happened before the pandemic, right?
Right.
And I think what is happening almost is that there is a higher level of visibility that we're seeing within white cishet mainstream circles for
Mm.
things that we've been knowing, right? And one thing I will say is I think what I'm feeling in my work is like a deeper sense of awareness, right? And like, and once again, to quote my best friend, James Baldwin, he feels the same way,
Ooh.
right? Like I think the point of reading is like remembering that we're never alone in our
Mhm.
struggle. And I'm trying really hard, I think, in my work to do that now, to carry that sense that this is not the first time we've experienced this kind of horrible brutalization. Um, but this is a time where we can take what we've learned, hopefully to find a way towards freedom.
Mm. And I really hope that freedom is soon because
Girl.
I'm tired. My feet hurt. My ass hurt. My asshole hurts. Like
I'm
just
out here
everything.
trying to
Just
go to Wakanda. I'm like, can we go? Can we go?
yeah. Which I have. This is such a good time. I'm so glad you mentioned that. Like I'm a huge like specifically fantasy fan, specifically of the Avengers, and I'll never forget seeing Black Panther when it first came out. And mind you, a lot happened to me before that. Like my dad passed away suddenly
Mm,
around that Christmas the year before. My mom 2 years before that, and I was like, "What the fuck?" Like my two
mm,
binders are gone,
mm.
and the my best friend took me to a movie like 2 days after my dad passed, and I saw like the poster of Black Panther in the theater, and I was like, "Yep, I'm gonna see this opening day." Went opening day, and they did, of course, the first scene, and then they did like the Marvel title card across the screen. I just started crying and got chills. I
Oh,
was like, "We are a part of this world. Like people don't understand." I'm getting chills thinking about it right now. We are a part of this world. Like one of the things I love about fantasy and sci-fi, even though the audiences could be a hot ass mess, is that this is a place where we can imagine and where we can all be because there is nothing that we know exists, so we can make shit up
yeah.
and it's accepted. And
Hmm.
like Black Panther was so powerful for me. I went to see it 5 times in theaters. The first 2 months, I bought tickets for people. I was like, "Yo, we are going!" Like,
Come through being a Black Panther evangelist, talking about it.
yeah. And I love that it was just a place where we can be a princess who's also very brilliant in technology and like saying unapologetic shit to white people. Be like, white man, be quiet. Be like, and it's just accepted. And I'm like, this is why like I love creativity because we can fantasize these worlds where others can see themselves and then hopefully empower themselves and empower others. So thank you for the Black Panther reference.
Always.
Yes. So let's take me to my next question. How has your voice and message changed over time since the launch of your chapbook Stunt, which was published in late 2020? And mind you, it hasn't even been 2 years yet.
It hasn't. Well, you know what's so interesting? Well, interesting for me as someone who's a fan of myself is
Yes.
so I wrote Stunt after I wrote Let the Dead In, right? And so yeah.
Oh.
And so I have a good friend who is the head of a micro press in DC, Neon Hemlock. And he
Yes.
was like, "Hey, Saida, we had been talking about me doing a chapbook for years, but I was so busy stressing about my book, that wasn't necessarily where I was at." And then after I finished the manuscript, and then Rose Solari, who's my amazing publisher, was like,
Wow.
"Let's do it. Let's make this happen." The pandemic hit, and so I stress wrote Stunt because I needed.
Oh.
I guess this kind of goes back to Harriet Tubman, right? Like
Mm-hmm.
we need Black queer heroes. We
Yes.
and I don't know if Nellie Jackson was queer. I'm not trying to, propose that, but what I am really interested in are Black folk heroes that like move against respectability politics.
Yes.
Like aren't just trying to be like yes, and if we follow exactly kind of like what white supremacy has laid out as this model of the American dream, we're good, right?
Mm-hmm.
And like you have someone who literally, to quote one of my friends, Terry Lane Cross Davis, like broke the back of the Confederacy by playing their own game. And so, like, being able to kind of slip into that world in the beginning of the pandemic honestly helped keep me sane. Cause I literally was like, well, what would Millie Jackson do?
Mm. Yes. But I love that we have like that's one of the things I love about being black and queer is that I could do whatever fuck I want because I don't have a really fucked up playbook. It's like I don't have a fucked up playbook. Yes, I'm in a very, front facing heteronormative relationship, but it's like everything else about me is just like I'm shooting like glitter out of my ass. And I just love that nothing I do I have to apologize for because I'm not following the playbook. I'm just like I can just exist and be, I don't have to stay in a lane.
Yeah, and I mean, I think also too, honestly, that's why I know my mother is like, "Why do you write so much?" It's my very bad Guyanese accent. Why do you write so much about sex? I mean, it's also I'm like,
Yes.
don't read it, mommy. That'll be the best way. But I think it's also like it's not very often. I cannot remember many times other than Lizzo that I've seen big black women center
Yes.
their pleasure in a way that's not a joke, right? Like
Yes.
it's not meant to be a punchline. There's no one shrieking on horror at the end of it, or there's no bed breaking. Or even if the bed breaks, that doesn't mean anything has to stop, right?
Exactly.
And I think a lot of my work, particularly now, like I write a lot about pleasure, I think,
Yes.
and let the dead in. And I think that's it's been really important to me. And I think I feel freer now, right? I'm like, okay, I did this once. What would it mean to kind of continue to let myself be even more free in my work? And I think that's kind of been the blessing for me about all of this is like, yeah, as I write, I get to be the person I want to be.
Yes. And thank you for mentioning being black and fat. Not to make this about me, but this is why, like, I think my friends made such a big deal out of when I got married. And they were like, "You need the big ball gown. You need the glitter. You need to be put on the." And I was like, "I don't know." And then when I put on the ball gown, trying it, I was like, "Yep, this is me with the big ass train."
Yes.
Because it's like we're not embracing the ways that we need to be as black and fat.
Mhm.
It's like I can love myself. I can walk around in a spaghetti strap dress and look better than the best of them. And that's why I'm like, I am so grateful to Lizzo for the ways in which she puts herself out there. I absolutely love her. So thank you for taking a moment to honor her with me.
I always will. I was watching her show, Watch Out for the Big Girls, and she had that line where she was telling them, I want to treat you as good as I treat myself. And like honestly, when I think about like that's like how I feel about my poetry. I want to write,
Nice.
I want to create a world that is as good for every other fat black girl out there that is the world that I want for me. Right? Like that's why we do this.
Yes. Oh my god, this kind of, we ain't even halfway into the questions, y'all. Just FYI, we ain't even halfway into the questions. So yeah, I'm like, yes. Next question. Intersectionality and the influence of multiple identities on the self appears so prominently in your work. It has a very journalistic and ethnographic quality to it, like you are delivering the word on behalf of other to people who need to be in the know. When you write, do you have a specific protagonist in mind? And also, how does your own identities, if at all, appear in your work? Is it
Yeah.
important for poets and storytellers, especially those delivering messages today, owe our readers and ourselves an autobiographic moment? That's a very long question.
That's a beautiful question though. I'm gonna start with what I remember. You may have to jog me my memory a little bit because
Yes.
hashtag elder now. I turned 40 last year. I decided I'm an elder. So anyway,
Oh, nice.
so,
I'm 42, so yeah.
uh,
Yes.
yeah. Okay. So I don't know if it's necessary for everyone to do that. I know it was really necessary for me, right? I so what I'll say is that, I got a grant to go back to Guyana for a month and like research our family history.
Oh,
And,
wow.
it was really powerful. Like my dad came with me, even though he's like not always the biggest fan of going back. It's mad humid, real talk.
Mhm.
Like my grandmother was with me the entire time. It was one of the last few times I got to spend time with my grandfather before he passed.
Mm.
And it was like it was really freaking hard, right? Like, so I was getting all this information, and, you know, it was one of the first times I think that I was able to see my parents, not just as my parents, but as two people, right?
Mm.
That were literally doing their best to make sense of the world and the cultural construct they were given and left their entire whole ass home to come to the US to do
Mm.
that work. And it was traumatizing. It's
Mm.
traumatizing for them. It was traumatizing for us as their kids. And, I had the opportunity to do a residency that summer. And so every day I would write a poem, I would cry, and then I would go swimming. And it was incredibly healing, right? But
Oh.
it was really hard, hard work. Like it was the work of like like going back to like kind of little me, like baby
Mhm.
me, and kind of loving on myself in the ways that I needed that maybe the people around me weren't necessarily prepared to give because of all of the things they had gone through that I understood in a deeper way that I did before.
Wow.
So I say all of that to say that for me, it was a very conscious decision. And I don't think I could have written any of the work that I did then or write the work that I'm doing now without having that experience. And that was a lot to do with the generosity of my parents in that moment. Right.
Mm.
Um, but I do think it's a choice, like kind of we each have to make. I think in terms of the protagonist of my work, you know, um, I write for myself. Like I write the kind of work, or at least I hope I'm writing the kind of work that, another young Black queer girl could look at, another fat young Black queer girl could look at and be like, I see myself in this, right?
Mm.
Um, because being able to be seen and not just be like seen in terms of like a stereotype or people who are putting their own idea, projecting their own ideas of who and what you are onto you,
Mhm.
um, is so toxic and hard, and I think happens to so many of us, particularly as Black folks.
Yes.
Um, that I wanted that felt really necessary to me. Yeah, I mean, yeah, and I think it's actually been a lot more fun because I feel like I've been able. I'm not perfect by any stretch of the imagination, but I feel like
Mhm.
I've been able to love myself a bit better because of it.
Nice. Nice. And I gotta connect you with one of my best friends, Rachel. She is first generation Guyanese. Her mom is from Guyana, and she recently traveled back. Yeah,
What?
she had an aunt who passed away, and she recently traveled back to bury her aunt, and just the stories and time that she had a chance to process with us about that trip. Like I have to connect the two of you.
I would love that. Yeah.
Yes, I
We
definitely
probably
have to
got
do
some
that.
relatives in common. It's real small.
Yeah, you probably do. So next question. Y'all, I'm telling y'all, we are like slowly halfway through. But see, this is what happens when you come on Black Writers Read. You know you're going on a journey. So make sure you pop some popcorn, get some
Mhm.
wings, like get a blanket, like
Right? All the things. Sit in front of the fan.
yeah, get comfortable because it's gonna be a journey. So speaking of journeys, so the next question: history, place, time, and age serve as their own characters and message deliverers in Let the Dead End. Can you talk about each of these roles? Do you see their missions evolving as Black joy, Black existence, and Black excellence are kidnapped and stolen? And for reference, this question only recently emerged in light of the recent terrorist attacks in Buffalo, New York last week. I am imagining that there would have been a different answer pre 2020 and even pre pandemic.
Mm,
Or probably not.
yeah. I mean, I don't know, for me it would have been different. I will say that I think seeing the ways in which, like, the Don't Say Gay bills, the anti-CRT bills,
Mhm.
I was reading an article, and honestly what feels the most disturbing to me in the aftermath of this, right? Um, is thinking about the fact that teachers are saying that based on these new laws, they can't actually talk about this,
Right.
right? And what does that mean, right? Like, what does it mean to kind of hold that? And I think the other thing that I still wrestle with, right, is I'm part of a collective of Black queer folks, Black queer and trans folks, and we were talking about, I can't remember who it was that was murdered at the time, which in itself feels like it's like hurting me to
Right.
say in this moment. But I remember I just started weeping because I was like, if I'm murdered, like this is not how I don't want to be remembered for how I was killed. Like I want to
Mm.
be remembered for my life, And I think the way in which these characters are at play in my work is doing the work of not just remembering this massive harm that
Mhm.
propelled you onto the national stage, but remembering the life that you held, the things that about you that brought joy to yourself and to other people. Like who Yeah, like I still feel that way. Like if I'm killed by the police or if I'm killed by white supremacists or whoever, I don't want to be remembered for the way that I died. I want to be remembered for what I
Mhm.
gave. And I think that a lot of the work that I try to do is about holding and archiving those stories, because oftentimes I think the other thing that comes up is we're ashamed to tell the stories as they are,
Yes.
because we tend to internalize white supremacy. We tend to
Hmm.
internalize these stories because we are made to feel as if this was our fault. If we had been better, if we had done something different, if we had not been
Hmm.
there, this would not be happening, which very much speaks to rape culture, right?
Hmm.
And I think that's also why, despite of my mother, I tell our family's business, right?
Yeah.
'Cause honestly, you know, even if it's shit that they like feel ashamed of or whatever, like I also feel like, quite frankly, like we are here because of what you went through. We are here because
Hmm.
of the sacrifices and the decisions that you made to get us here, right? I could not be alive. I could not be an openly Black, fat, queer woman who is a poet slash social worker without the sacrifices that the people before me made. And I want to celebrate that shit.
Mm. Nice. So this is an interesting transition, going back specifically to Let the Dead In. So visual art also informs your work. Can
Hmm.
you talk about the why and how, especially with your poems Nude Study of a Black Woman 1850, which is based on a piece of artwork in a museum, and Good Favor, which is based on a personal photograph of a family member? Like, how can you talk about how you came to those particular pieces?
Yeah, sure. So with Good Favor, that picture is of my great great grandmother, or at least we believe it is. And if you see it, like, it's my grandmother, it's my great great grandmother, this very, very light woman in like a corset and like gown, like, like very Gone with the Wind era. And, my mom kept asking my great grandmother, like, who is this? Can you tell us about her? What's her name? Like, and my grandmother would say it was, her mother. But anything, if you asked her anything more, like her name or who she was, she would start to weep. Right. And so the family lore that I heard, and once again, this is all supposition, right, is that we think that she was murdered by her husband, right? Which speaks to kind of like the ways in which we've seen domestic violence within our own lineage, right? And
Mhm.
also, quite frankly, through the lineage of a lot of Black folks, right?
Yes.
Um, and so that poem in particular was very much just imagining, like, what would great great granny say if she were with us in this moment? And I think also too, like for me, this sense of profound loss, right? Like, while on one level, it I am grateful that I have even that, knowing the fact that so many Black folks don't even have access to that. It's
Mm.
also enraging to know that I need to be grateful for this picture with no name, of which I will never know the true history of, right?
Mm.
Um, because so much has been taken away from us, and like really reflecting the fact that, like, when you think about, like, in particular, the stories and histories of our kinship, it really feels like an erasure poem, right?
Wow.
But we'll never know the original text. We'll never know the source text.
Mhm.
Um, I think with the other poem, so my friend Terry, who's another poet, is amazing. Has like these pictures of Black women through the ages, right?
Mhm.
And there was this picture of this, right, of this Black woman. um it was a black and white, it was a daguerreotype. She had her fingers inside her and she was laid back on a chaise lounge. And so
Mm.
I was really fascinated by that because I'd never seen that kind of picture before, of frank sexuality, and yet wondering kind of like what were the circumstances this picture was taken under, right? And wondering, like, the likelihood, that either she was in service or an employee, of white folks, made me
Mm.
want to imagine ways in which to, like, offer a backstory that, imbued her with agency.
Mhm. Nice. You use first person you use the first person narrative for Let the Dead In rather frequently.
Hmm.
Why that particular choice? So there's like particular use of I.
Hmm. Yeah, I feel like I is real important. Emotional intelligence is
Mm.
real important to me, right? And so I think there's something about, like, claiming our stories,
Mm-hmm.
not from a distance, but from like us, right? Like from myself, from the I, right?
Mm.
It was this was a fascinating question. I really had to kind of think about that a bit, and I think that's what I keep coming back to is like, to quote Shaka Khan, I'm not quite every woman, but I think like there's something about being able to offer that kind of immediacy and
Mm.
centrality in that.
Nice. The particular question I ask all of our Black Writers Read guests is, what are some possibilities and limitations of your particular genre? And what do we owe to both ourselves and our readers by delivering our messages through our chosen genre?
Mm. Yeah, so I mean, I think to me, kind of the limitation that comes up is that risk of poetry, I think, or like poetry feeling rarefied, right? Like in a sense of
Mm.
kind of like how people are like, well, this is real poetry and slam poetry is not real poetry or hip hop isn't. And all of those conversations, I think I never really fully got to
Mm-hmm.
an extent because I think ultimately at the end of the day, like when we think about poetry, I think about Lucille Clifton's poem Study the Masters, right? When we go back in our own history, there's only so far you can go before literacy was a crime,
Right.
right? So when we think about the ways in which that's showing up within the canon of poetry, I think it's important for us to think about how is it we may be um, essentially projecting white supremacy into
Mm.
something that is meant to bring us closer to freedom.
Yes, because I'll never forget. I went to a workshop years ago. As for those who are watching, one of my writing mediums is poetry, and we were doing like a collaborative workshop where we would pass the poem down and someone would take a snippet. And mind you, this was another Black woman, but she was in a very traditional MFA program, and that's a whole other story. I
Mhm.
passed her my poem, and she's like, "What the fuck is this? This isn't poetry."
Mm,
And I was like, "Did you even read it?" Like, that you just took it and saw that it was not. And I'm like, okay. And so this is why I'm very particular with, one, the type of spaces that I share my work in, and then two, the people who come. Even though Black Writers Read is not poetry specific, but the people who I bring on here, because Black Writers Read, I want us to, for some reasons, fuck up the canon. It's like, this
mhm,
is like, literature is extremely expansive, and this is why I am very particular with the people who I invite on here. I invite people who push back when it comes to particular genres. And so
mhm.
I appreciate your work so much.
Thank you.
Yes.
Mhm.
So speaking of that, what does it mean to write poetry at this time? How does it contribute to African diasporic culture, queerness, and the expansive and expanding literary canon?
So I think for me, when I think about how this kind of contributes to the canon at large, like my hope is that it just contributes in concert with the work of other really dope Black women who are like kind of just shrugging off the burdens of feeling like they have to teach or do anything else other than the fuck they want to do.
Yes.
That's literally all I want to do at the end of the day. Like I want to provide that model for someone. Like I remember for a long time, I tried to give poetry up because I was like, well, you can't be a revolutionary and be a poet, right? And I was like, wait,
Mm.
like, I had to go back and like that was the all of these assumptions, right? And like thinking about
Mm.
Sonia Sanchez, Nikki Giovanni, and June Jordan, right? Like all of these folks who were solidly rooted in a Black radical tradition and very much like centered their poetry as a core practice, right?
Mm.
And I think the lesson that I took from that is like I don't at the end of this, like so often as Black women and femmes, like we're taught like we gotta take care of everybody but ourselves. And like
Yes.
I want to be able to love myself. Like at the end of
Mhm.
this, like at the end of my life, whatever it is, like I just want to be able to look back and be like, no matter what, I love myself.
Yes, and thank you for mentioning Sonia Sanchez. Going back to that workshop, it was a week-long workshop, and
Mhm.
that Wednesday I was just fed up. I was like, I don't care how much I paid, I can't do this anymore. I remember going to our local independent bookstore. It's now closed. This was, of course, years ago. And the first thing I did was I picked up Sonia Sanchez's new book, cuddled up on the couch, friend of mine worked there at the time. He was like, "Hey, Nicole, how you doing? I need 15 minutes. I need to just not right now." Especially there was just so much whiteness in that in the workshop. And he was like,
Mhm.
"No, I need some time with Sonia Sanchez." I literally just sat there and read her book and cried for like 15 minutes. And I was like, "Okay, I'm
Mm.
ready to come back," because I needed like it was
Mhm.
just so it was so demoralizing to be in that space. And so
Yeah.
to have our foremothers like June Jordan and praise the Audre Lorde and like all of them,
Mhm.
like I like just the ways in which they hold the space for themselves and the space for others, and Lucille Clifton and June Jordan, which I'm so mad these women I didn't get to know until later in life. I'm like, oh, thank you.
I know. I take it real personally that I don't know them. Yeah, I take it very
Mm,
personally.
yes, and especially James Baldwin. I'm like,
Mhm.
why? Because he passed away when we were really young, like we were like crawling, and I'm like,
Yeah.
why couldn't we have been in a world where yes,
Timing has some things to answer for
it
sure.
does, it does,
Mhm.
it does. And I've been so looking forward to asking this question to you because of the prominence that they play in your gratitude section. And also, too, you mentioned one of the collectives in your bio, and also you mentioned them here. So, in the gratitude section of your book, you mentioned the Black Ladies Brunch Collective and the Rooted Collection.
Mhm.
Can you talk about these groups and how they have influenced and assisted you in your writing journey?
Yeah, sure. So, the Black Ladies Brunch Collective was founded first. It's a group of Black women poets, all based in the DMV. Well, not quite anymore because I moved to upstate New York, but I would say that group has been profoundly transformational for me. Um, as like so many of them, in particular Terry Ellen Cross Davis, I think really has been just like, without Terry, I don't know if I really would have had a book to talk about because I had all these poems, but I kept pushing and pushing and pushing. I was like, no, no, it's not ready. It's not ready. And Terry was finally like, girl, just put them together. I'll read it. Right.
Oh,
And she went through that manuscript with me page by page, and like we had an accountability pact. And I know Terry does not need anyone to be accountable to in order to submit her work out.
right.
But she made that space for me, right? And I think about that a lot. I think about the generosity of Black women and how much they have like saved my life, right? And I think for the Rooted Collective, that same sense of generosity speaks through. So the Rooted Collective is a collective I founded I think in 2015, and it is a group of Black LGBTQ folks based in Baltimore. They still let me hang around. And
Yes.
we basically center pleasure as a practice that is both liberatory and will get us to freedom. And we do various like space, we create spaces together. We're currently doing a zine of like Baltimore based artists who are
Mm,
LGBTQ. And it's just such a space of like deep love and
right.
generosity to each other. Like it basically just feels like a big hug every time you go there.
Oh,
Yeah. So I
wow.
feel very, very blessed and lucky to have these groups in my life.
Nice. And even just your gratitude section is just so beautifully written, and you can just see the love and support that so many people have for you. So I'm like, I'm glad that was like something told me flip to the back of the book, and that was the first thing that I read was the gratitude section, and I was just like, oh, this is amazing.
Thank
So
you.
yeah,
Yeah,
so I
I feel
love
blessed.
yeah that you have the group, the support that you have. So we have two more questions, everyone. So the
Let's
second to
do it.
last, yes, the second to last question I have is: I love that the book ends with quote, "Why should she die any different?" End quote. Are you able to forecast what comes next for the she that is mentioned in your last poem at the end, and what is the world that you want for her?
I think, so it's interesting because I started to work on my second collection, and
Yay.
it's a series of brief sermons on everything from like sex to Black Death. And then there's like these other poems about just Black women who refuse to give any fucks. I mean, there really isn't any other way to put it. I was talking to a friend about it this morning, and I was like, yeah, I was like, basically what I'm doing about is like writing, about, Black rage and then writing about pleasure, and I was like, well, that's just gonna have to be enough. There's like, so I don't know if you know, but like Jenny Thomas called Anita Hill a few
Oh
years
yeah.
ago and demanded that Anita Hill apologize, publicly to them, for when she named Clarence Thomas had sexually harassed her. So I
Mhm.
wrote a poem about that. Right. I wrote a poem called Let the World Be Like My Pussy. And it's just, I'm
Yes.
having a lot of fun. I'm having a lot of fun. And I'm hoping that, when, let's, knocking on wood, when it's published,
Yes.
that other folks will feel joy in it.
Yes. And the last question I have for you, speaking of, what is next for you and how can the Black Writers Read community support you in your work?
Yeah. So I'm actually going to be in partnership with the National Museum of Women in the Arts, going to be staging a dramatic reading of Stunt on June
Oh,
16th. So folks are more
oh,
than invited to come. They have a book club. I think there's like a link to sign up. So it'd be great to see folks there. And actually, Nicole, I'll be in Connecticut on June 11th, I think,
oh,
Sunday, June 11th. In Stanford, I'm not very good with geography. Geography and I are not friends,
yeah.
but I can share that information with you. So if folks are
Yeah.
like in the Connecticut area, I think Stanford, you're more than welcome to come, and I'll be selling books.
Yeah, and I will be so appreciative to meet you in person and to have you sign.
I would
Yeah,
love
because
to.
I'm in Windsor. I think I may be an hour and a half. I'm still because I've been here 2 years and I moved right before the pandemic from Western Mass, and then from Detroit years prior to that. And I'm still trying to understand the geography, but I think I'm an hour and a half away. I think.
Girl, I don't know. I just ask Google everything. I really don't know.
Yes. Oh, too great. So this has been just such a great conversation. Before we wrap up today, I want to give a very special thank you to Saida for joining us today. And everyone, please be sure, I'm going to bring it back up on the screen. Please be sure to order her book, Let the Dead In, and also Stunt at her website, which is saidaagostini.com. And I'm going to do a couple of wrap up things before we end today. So, Saida, thank you so, so much for joining us today.
Thank you. This was a joy.
Yay, thank you so much. So, I have so many great things to announce for the future of Black Writers Read before we wrap up for season two. I'll be back next month with two Juneteenth weekend events. Two is going to be a pretty, pretty, pretty packed weekend of Juneteenth. So, we'll be doing an in person version of Black Writers Read for the first time in front of an audience on Saturday, June 18th at the Lava Center in Greenfield, Massachusetts. I am very grateful to Vanessa and Jan for inviting me to host a Black Writers Read live and in person at their amazing space. Then on Sunday, June 19th, on Juneteenth, I will host a live stream virtual reading. We plan to launch the audio version of Black Writers Read in July, with the live stream version going on hiatus until September. So please be sure to follow me on social media and check out my website at NicoleMYoung.com for more information, as I will be announcing the guest, plural guests, for each episode very soon. So thank you again to Lisa Pegram and Levee Break Lit for co-presenting today's episode. Thanks to all of our viewers for spending an afternoon with us, and more importantly, for making Black authors matter. See you next month.